Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our very special guest and keynote speaker, Raven Sinclair.
Well, I need to introduce myself in a proper manner. So, tansay ka kia na wah kamaganak utsko apit na sigason igwa pusakana chich na toschin. Kinanas kom tin awia kawi komchik otaka pikskwayan. Nmoya Mr. Hey kiski taman aya absis awi me mamaskotanan. And I want to acknowledge the peoples whose territory that we're on today and give thanks to them for hosting us today. So those lights are really bright. I feel like a rock star over here. So my name is Raven. My Cree name is Oskoapit, which has a very lengthy sort of translation in English, so I'll just skip that part. But the other thing that I said is greetings to all my relations. I shake hands with all of you. And I come from Treaty 4 area in southern Saskatchewan, which is kind of near the Fort Capel Valley, Cree territory. And, you know, lots of times people, more and more the older I get, people say, you know, renowned expert and all these sorts of things. And the beautiful thing about the Cree language is that embedded in the language is very significant sort of knowledge about human beings and our ways of being in the world. So my introduction includes a phrase where I said, I don't know very much, but I'll talk to you about a little bit. And it's great because it reminds me that I don't have to be the expert. I can fumble, you know, the way that we all do, and just speak to you about what I know the best. And so I asked if we might have a few slides here, and because I'm a very visual person, and I just like to have them to sort of augment what I'm saying. So I want to give you a very brief foundation for this film, this beautiful film that Tasha Hubbard has put together about Betty Ann Adams and her family and their reunion. But what I've come to understand is that many people are not familiar with what the 60 Scoop means, or as I have renamed it, the Indigenous Child Removal System in Canada. So it's often referred to as the 60 Scoop, but it spans from the late 40s to the present day. And the 60 Scoop, that's a whole nother story to tell you how that came about. I often tell people that the cruelest thing you can do to an academic is give them 10 minutes to speak. So I'm going to try to squash about 30 hours into 10 minutes. It'll be interesting. So I just like to use these quotes here that remembering and telling the truth about terrible events are prerequisites for both the restoration of social order and the healing of individual victims. It's a very important book by Judith Herman and also Saul Anensky, who wrote a little very important piece of work in the 60s called Rules for Radicals, said, reconciliation doesn't mean that one side gets and keeps all of the good stuff, the resources, and the other side becomes reconciled to it. So we'll just go to the next slide here. So my own, you know, how did I come to this point of sharing with you information and understanding, providing some insights for you? Well, that's me there, that cute little waif with the pixie haircut. And those are my parents. So my mother's Ruth Pelche from Gordon's First Nation. My father's Raymond Sinclair from a neighboring reserve called Kuakatus. My mother is Kriya Seneboyan. My father is what was called half-breed Soto, so an Anishinaabe man. And we'll pop to the next one. And I was, my father died when I was very young. I was about 6 weeks old. My mother was 28 with 8 children. And so we didn't have the same social safety net in Canada that we do now. And so we were in this small town in Alberta, Oyen, Alberta. And she had to move us all to Saskatoon after a couple of years because she just couldn't make a go of it. So we moved to Saskatoon and moved in with her sister and her 5 kids. So there were 2 women and about 13, 14 kids in this house, and it was a very happy time. So when I look at that image of me, that picture of me, that was actually my adoption photograph. And I look very happy. And when I first found this photograph in my parents' documents, adoption documents, I thought, well, why was I so happy? Was it because I was being adopted? What was going on? But it was because I was a very happy kid before I was apprehended by child welfare. All of the trauma happened after. We weren't wealthy. We were quite poor, but we did what kids did, which is we played outside all day long, and we were rough and tumbled like a pack of little wolf pups. And we loved each other unconditionally, had that incredibly strong family support. Luckily, well, I don't know if it's so lucky, but it's taken about 30 years. I reunited with my family in 1988, and now it's 2018, so that's 30 years, is it? I think so. It's taken that long for me to regain that family bond. So I was away from them for, about 20 years, and it's taken another 30 years to recover what we lost. So this is my adoptive family, and this is about 8 months after I was adopted. We moved to West Germany. So these images are just shortly after we landed in West Germany. We were in Amsterdam. And my family is very white, upper middle class. My father was a professor and a dean of theology at Queen's University, and my mother was a psychiatric nurse, although I often say that she should have been in the institution instead of working in it, because she had her issues. We're close now that she's 98, but we've repaired a lot of that relationship. She was quite abusive towards me, so that sort of exacerbated the trauma that I experienced of daily racism and ostracism and discrimination, because I was always the only non-Indigenous child in my context, school, wherever I went. I went to school in West Germany. I started school in West Germany, and that was a very good experience. But again, there was lots of turmoil that went on at the same time because my mother was very troubled. So we'll just go to the next slide. So as I grew up, I started to lose my mind a little bit from the trauma. But I also, when I started university, I wondered what was this all about? Why did this happen to me? And so I started to learn about Indigenous history in Canada. And like many of you, when I first encountered the information, it was very shocking to me and surprising. But the important thing was that it enabled me to contextualize my experience in the greater context of history in Canada, but the experience of Indigenous people. And so I went, way back to look at, well, how is it that we have this situation where there's such a racial divide, and Indigenous people are oppressed and discriminated at all levels, individually, interpersonally, systemically, organizationally, institutionally. And so I looked back to some of the early settlers and thinkers even, and encountered these two sort of salient quotes. So this is a little bit of a quiz too. So this guy up here on the right, he said this: "We know the size of the world and the total extent. It's our duty to seize every opportunity of acquiring more territory. More territory simply means more of the Anglo-Saxon race, more of the best, the most human, most honorable race the world possesses." So he was an ardent imperialist, and he made a lot of money diamond mining in Africa, in one country. And he had the audacity to go into this country and become very enriched on the slave labor of the populace. And his legacy still stands today, such that the best and brightest university students in North America compete for scholarships in his name. And if they win, they go to Oxford and study for 2 years. What's his name? Yeah. I gave you a lot of hints, didn't I? Cecil Rhodes, yeah. So this is the mindset. Right? And we can go back in history. We can look at Hobbes and Locke in particular, and some of his sort of perspective. His perspective of Indigenous populations was pretty horrific. And then, so this guy on the left here, more contemporarily, said, our objective is to continue until there's not a single Indian in Canada that has not been absorbed into the body politic. There's no Indian question, no Indian department. That's the sole object of this residential school bill. So this was read in the House of Commons in the early 20s. Anybody know who that is? Our first Minister of Indian Affairs. Yeah, Duncan Campbell Scott, who was also a romantic poet. So it's really interesting. If you really want a history of Canada, read Clearing the Plains by James Daschuk. And it's a difficult read, so prepare yourself. But Scott implemented some of the most oppressive and repressive policies towards Indigenous people, and then, designed at our decimation, designed at, geared towards our obliteration, and then would write romantic poems about the disappearing Indian, walking off into the sunset proudly. So this really helped me to contextualize. And then, of course, I encountered the history of residential schools. And these are just images to sort of evoke our collective memory about this, because we carry these memories, even if we weren't directly involved, we carry these memories through our DNA, through our ancestry, regardless of whether, our ancestors were in the schools or not. So we'll go to the next slide. And this one's even more difficult. So that image there of Big Bear is on the cover of James Daschuk's book. But that image was taken at a time where starvation policies were the order of the day. So the deliberate starvation of Indigenous populations to put us in a vulnerable state so that we were more easily manipulated and coerced. And after this time, when we were so vulnerable, is when we see the the reserve system being established, as well as the residential schools was still ongoing. What's this an image of? Buffalo skulls, yeah. So, Eduardo Duran is a Native American psychologist, and he said that there was this general who said, if you want to, destroy a people, you destroy their commissary. And commissary is a military term for their food source. Right? So this also went a long way in putting us in a vulnerable situation where we were completely at the mercy of Indian agents and agents of government to provide us food, because we no longer had our traditional food sources. We'll go to the next slide. My reason for giving you this little snapshot of history is because then it sets us up for, the ongoing sort of vulnerability of Indigenous people. So after 5 generations, I'm the 6th generation residential school survivor. I didn't go, but 5 generations, both of my parents went, and 4 generations before them. And so lots and lots of intergenerational, interpersonal trauma has been passed down through my family lines. Violence, substance abuse, sexual abuse, you name it, it's all there. And then in my generation, as the residential schools declined, they started to fall apart. And the government said, what should we do here? They started to infuse money into the social welfare system. And we see this explosion of the removal of Indigenous children and our placement into non-Indigenous families. So here's just a few statistics, although I'll add one that's not in here. From 1959, Indigenous children in the child welfare system represented less than 1% of all the kids in care. 10 years later, we represented 40% of all the children in care being First Nations, Métis, Inuit. And now, in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC, we represent between 65 and 90% of all the children in care are Indigenous children. So we have an entire child welfare system that is built upon the backs and existing on the backs of Indigenous children and families. So children have an incredibly high sort of statistical probability of ending up in the child welfare system. And many studies have shown it's a pipeline to homelessness, drug abuse, incarceration, suicide, mental health issues. Thankfully, right now, we're looking at reforming the child welfare system. And here's a statistic that should jump out at you. Between 1989 and 2012, First Nations kids, this is just treaty children, spent the equivalent of 166 million nights in care, or 66 million nights in care, which translates to 180,000 years. So when I try to conceptualize, well, what's 180,000 years in terms of language loss, culture loss, love, nurturing, family connection, the transmission of traditional knowledge, the transmission of language, I can't conceptualize 180,000 years. I have a hard time with 5. So we'll go to the next slide. But here's where our solutions are and the strength of Indigenous people. I think it's why we're still here. Because we have our Indigenous knowledge, we have our culture, we have our languages. And just an incredible foundation of understanding the world and how to live in it. And this knowledge still remains. We've tended to be a little bit possessive of it and secretive about it because we notice that when people sometimes discover a little bit about the power of Indigenous knowledge, they run out and set up a business to make money and heal people by giving them their spirit names, doing ceremonies, and so on. But we have this incredible knowledge, and for me, it was my survival. And for many, many others, researchers are showing now that the best intervention for drug abuse, substance abuse, mental health disorders is culture. For Indigenous people is culture. Cultural practices, cultural knowledge, ceremonies, and so on. As well as things like the implementation of traditional forms of family systems and child rearing. So we'll pop to the next slide, and I think this will be the last one. So we have lots and lots of stories, and so I'm going to finish with this one because I'm pretty sure that I'm at probably 11 or 12 minutes already, so I'm over. But here's just one story that I can share with you. And this comes from Sylvia McAdam. She's one of the founders of Adam No More. And I would consider her an elder and a teacher, even though she's younger than me, because she comes from an unbroken line of people who were hidden from the residential schools. So we have these people all across the country, and they are our keepers of knowledge. So this story comes from her father, Francis C.C. Wiham. So in this story, it's Wissahickik, and we only say Wissahickik's name between the autumn equinox and the spring solstice. It's the time of storytelling. So Wissahickik, some refer to Wissahickik as coyote or trickster, is a figure in a spirit in our culture that points out or highlights our human follies and weaknesses and the ironies of our existence, but sometimes also brings very important information to us. So Wissahickik was out one day minding his own business, doing his thing, maybe singing, dancing, getting into mischief, and Creator directed Wissahickik to go to the top of Okimawaskwche, which is the highest point in the Cypress Hills, Saskatchewan. And Wissahickik was to pray to the 4 directions and probably fasted for 4 days or 40 days, we're not sure. And once he had done this, then Creator gave Wissahickik Manituwe and Nehiyaw-Cree. So Creator's laws and Cree laws. Laws is a problematic word because it's a Western construction. Probably a better combination of words would be principles, guidelines, tenets, spiritual, social tenets that we should adhere to, we should strive to adhere to these. And these 4 laws are Pastahowin, Pastamowin, Ushchinewin, Ushchinemuwin. And they're very difficult to live by. So Pastahowin is the principle that we must not ever physically harm another human being. in any way, in any capacity. Oshtinewin is that we must never use our words in a harmful way against any other human being, even if the words are only in our head. Oshtinewin is that we must never use physical violence against anything other than human. So animals, plants, the earth. And Oshtinewin is that we should never use our words in a harmful way to anything that is not other than human beings. And that last one also means, Pastamawin and Oshtinewin both mean that in those times where we see injustice or harm being perpetrated, we're also compelled to use our words to intervene. And so Oshtinewin is about not only not using our words to harm non-human things, but to also utter the protocols and prayers that are necessary at certain times. When we've entered into agreement with an animal, that they'll provide us with nourishment. There's certain protocols that have to be uttered. These are very powerful teachings in our cultures. And all Indigenous cultures all around the globe have their articulations of these teachings. So you can see then that Indigenous families have been very harshly disrupted, decimated. Cultures have been attacked, and there's so much there to destroy. And you know, in the film Birth of a Family, Betty does such a good job, or Tasha and Betty do such a good job of that experience of the significance of coming back together with your family. It's not just a physical act, it's also a spiritual one. And I think that's why it's a profound film, because we get a glimmer into that, the power of that reconnection with our family and a little bit of reconnection with our culture. So thank you for listening so carefully, and I hope that you enjoy the film.